I don't know if you've been back in, if you've seen what they're doing in kids ministry, but I thought this was hilarious, and I wanted to show you if you haven't seen it yet. Annie, who's back there, she's doing a great job with the kids, and she's helping them make little church plants. And these are church plants that all the kids are making, which I thought was hilarious. So we have like a whole group of church planters back there, like that are already doing their thing. Yeah, isn't that awesome? And so she started to do that. I thought it was great. And yeah, so you'll see more of these coming up, but that's kind of something they've been working on together with the kids. I just thought it was a great idea. So they're making church plants, and if one time, this is like a total tangent, but one time I had a pastor who we made potted plants for our Mother's Day, and so these kids had made potted plants. They took them home to their moms, right? And a few weeks later, our pastor came back, and he had this. It was part of his sermon, and he was using this as an illustration of one of the things he was talking about. And he was like, my daughter, she went into that class, and she made this little pot plant for her mom, and she brought that little pot plant back to our house, and she gave it to her mom, and her mom, I mean, he's getting emotional. He's like, and her mom just, she took it, she put it in the windowsill, and she grew that little pot plant. And she grew it, and everybody that come over, she'd show them that little pot plant. And everybody was looking at the pot plant. It just meant so much to her to see it grow. And I was like, oh, no. I mean, there's a big difference between a pot plant and a potted plant. A really big difference. And I thought, man, if we do that again next Mother's Day, we're going to have like hippies just out the door sending their kids in, like, go get those pot plant kids. So that had nothing to do with the sermon today. That was free. Anyways, so so if you've been here, we are a church plant. If you're not aware, this is a church plant. That's what's going on here, and we're still in this pre-launch phase. We're still getting ready to officially launch the community, but there's so much stuff that's going on right now, and it's been awesome. And so we are in this series of Grassroots Gospel because we're learning from the book of Acts, this grassroots, this groundswell of what the church became when it first started, and how we as a church plant, as a groundswell, how we can learn from what they were doing in their day, how we can apply that to what we're doing right now. And so we've walked through the first couple chapters, and we're in that second chapter. We're in the end of the second chapter. And if you recall, last week we kind of ended with this tongues of fire thing. And if you haven't seen this yet, the sermon is up online, because we're like a real church now. I mean, we're fancy. Yeah, the video is up online. So if you missed it last week, you can go back and watch it. We talked about these tongues of fire and the weirdest terminology of tongues of fire that happens in Acts 2. And we talked a little bit about that. And I didn't know if it was just Luke being bad at naming things and trying to describe things when he's writing the book of Acts, or if that's really what they were. And I told you a little about my daughter even, as we went to the park, and she had these cliques, and she was really worried about going to the park because there were cliques at the park. And she was really worried about going there. If you remember, we were going to this park, and she said, I don't want to go there, there's too many cliques. My daughter's 5. And I was like, what's your deal with I felt like her emotional intelligence was very high, and I was very proud of her. But I was like, what's the deal with the cliques? Turns out it wasn't people. It was static electricity. And when it snapped her, she felt the click, and she didn't like that. So it was a big letdown for me, but, I mean, it made sense to her. And today I want to talk about a different type of click. I don't want to talk about necessarily that being bad at naming things. I don't want to talk about static electricity. I want to talk about what the difference is between cliques and community. Because there's a big, big, big difference between cliques and community. And I think if I was to sum it up and say what would be the difference between the clique and the community, I think cliques, they revolve around this idea, and they're made up of individuals where that group is a self-serving group. And that's what a clique looks like, but a community is a self-sacrificing group. It's a group that's willing to give of themselves to see the betterment of the group. And I want to look at that today in Acts 2. We just kind of finished out that part of Acts 2. And if you remember, the tongues of fire come down, the disciples go out, they preach. And this guy, Peter, he preaches this sermon that's apparently pretty good. And there's 3,000 people baptized in one day. So he did it all right. I don't know how their sound system worked. I don't know how any of that, how did he get to 3,000 people? How did they all hear him? I don't know how any of that worked. It seems they did it. And 3,000 people are baptized in one day. Now they're trying to figure out, how do we live with this? We're starting to see this groundswell. We're starting to see people come to know Jesus and get to be a part of this community called the church. But how How are we supposed to do life together? How do we do that? And we see this thing in Acts 2, and it's in Acts 2, verse 42, and it says this: they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. So this is the whole group. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe, and many wonders and miraculous signs were done by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. Every day they continued to meet in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes. They ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. This is the utopia of the church. This moment is like the pinnacle. This is the best it'll ever be. For the next 2,000 years, the church will try to recreate this moment. Like, it's that good. You know, nobody's like arguing about carpet colors. Nobody's upset about how many hymns were sung or not sung. Nobody's disguising prayer requests as gossip. Like, we're not having that yet because we don't know how to do church well yet. And so there's still this moment where things are good. Things are working. If you don't describe, like, let's be honest, guys, like the prayer request thing, I mean, come on. Where you disguise your gossip as a prayer request. And if not, you just say, I have an unspoken, right? We have those things happen in church all the time. We know how church works. And this is before that mess took off. This is before that. And something amazing is happening. There is this perfection of the church that we see in these verses. And you got to wonder, how did they do it? How did they get there? Like, how did they pull this off? Right? And I think in this first verse, there is a word that is really, really powerful. We're going to look at a few things, that how we see them self-sacrifice rather than self-serve. In the first verse, there's this line where it says, they devoted themselves. In verse 42, they devoted themselves. See, I think we have this idea that community is only for extroverts. Like, it's for people who like being around people, right? Like, if you like being around people, you'd love to be in community, right? Like, that's how it works. But I don't think that's true. I don't think it's just for extroverts. In fact, this is self-disclosure here. I actually am an introvert. And that's actually the truth. I'm actually an introvert. I feel like I'm like this is a big secret. I'm actually an introvert. I don't actually, like, if I have specific time, I actually would prefer to be by myself a lot of times. To do work, to get things done, to just have time to think. I need to be by myself. I actually do better by myself a lot of times. And I find that community is not just for extroverts because I have to make it a discipline. I believe that community is as much a discipline in the Bible as anything else. As worship, as tithing, as prayer, as Bible study, it's all discipline. And I believe that community is actually a discipline. It may not come natural to all of us, but it's something we need. We're designed for it. We need it. We see this in Genesis chapter 2 when God's making man, right? So God's making this, he makes man, and it says he forms the man in his own image. And then it says he makes all these things, right? So he makes the man, and he makes this man, and he's making, first he makes, the sky and the water, and he separates them. He says it's good. He makes light and dark, and he says it's good, right? He makes these fish in the water and these birds in the air, and he says it's good. He creates animals. He says they're good. He makes the plants, the trees. He says they're good. And then he makes man, and he says it's not good. Which begs this age-old question of, did God screw up when he made men? And we still don't know. I mean, jury's kind of still out, really. We don't know. The question is, what was the problem? Why is it not good? Everything else has been good. Why is it not good? God says it's not good. Is it a quality issue? Did he mess up on man? Or is it a quantity issue? What we find is, he says, it is not good for man to be alone. It's a quantity issue. Why is he not created to be alone? Because we are created in God's image. And God himself is a Trinity, right? There's a Father, a Spirit, and a Son. God himself is in community at all times. And if we are created in his image, we are designed to be in community. We're designed to be with others. It's just part of the way we're wired. It's not good for man to be alone. And I think that's really true. And so it's a discipline, it's a devotion to be in community. There was a point in my life, this is a few years ago, I was working at a job that was just getting really big. And it was a great job. I loved the job I had, but it was big, and it was at a church. And it was one of those things where I was a pastor, and the job was like requiring me to work other days than just Sunday. And I was like, I didn't sign up for this. And so I was working this job, and it was just getting big, and I had a staff that was growing, but I also had one staff member leave who was just awesome, and he went to go pursue a way cooler job. But he was a great guy, and when he left, it just left a ton of work on me, and I had this other staff that was building, and there was just so much going on, and so many volunteers, and so many people that need your time, just so much going on in the community, and I was getting so overwhelmed, and I was 28. And I honestly already felt like, I think I'm on the verge of burnout. Like, I think I'm done. I don't think I can do this anymore. And I remember this moment where I just felt like I have nothing else to offer anyone. And I felt like I was just done. And I told Marie, I said, I think that's the end of it. Like, I don't know if I can keep doing this ministry thing. And so she was a little nervous. And she booked me this place at this retreat center up in the mountains, and they got me a place up there, and I went up there, and before I left, she handed me this envelope, and there was this envelope, and it was weird. It felt really weird. I was trying to figure out what was in it. I was hoping for like an iPad, but but it didn't feel like that, and it was like it was a little weird, and it was like lumpy and stuff, and I was like, that doesn't feel, unless this iPad got broken, and so I took this envelope with me. And she sent me away, and she said, read this when you get there. Take a look at this when you get there. So I took it with me. And I got up to this cabin, and it was a day completely away from all other humans. Again, as an introvert, sometimes you need that. And I got up there, and I sat down, and I started reading another book because I thought, I don't know that I want to get into whatever that thing is. And eventually, you just see it sitting there on the table. You just see it, and it's like staring at you. And you're like, okay, I've got to open this thing. I opened it up, and there were all these different letters all throughout it. And Marie had talked to some people in our community, some people that we were close with, some friends that we had really made strong connection with, and said, would you write a note to Kevin just to encourage him, just to tell him what he means to your life, why he's a part of it, why he matters to you, and why what he's doing is valuable through this thing called the church. And I sat down, I read every single letter, and I'm not a highly emotional guy, but man, it messed me up. It just wrecked me. And I just sat there weeping over these letters, and I took a picture of it, just thinking about the words that were written to me. And the reality, guys, is I think sometimes life is too heavy to walk through it alone. And I don't say that to say that you're weak. I say that because you're a human and you've been designed to be in community. We're just better together. People are just better together. We lift each other up when we need to lift each other up. We celebrate joys together when things are good. We like to eat together, and that's fun. We do social things together, and we actually enjoy them more because we have shared experience with one another, right? Have you ever been the solo rider on a roller coaster? It's not nearly as fun, right? Like, you want a shared experience. You want somebody else with you. We're better when we have people around us. And it's true not just because of church, not just because of the Bible, but I literally believe God has wired us for that. And we have to be willing to discipline ourselves, to commit ourselves, not just when it's convenient for us, because community isn't always convenient. But we have to discipline ourselves to say, I will be a part of a community. I will self-sacrifice, not self-serve. I will self-sacrifice to be a part of community, because there is going to be a day where you're going to need them to serve you back. And the disciples were willing to do that. This young church, they were willing to do that. They devoted themselves. And it says not just that they devote themselves to this teaching, but it says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Now when it says that, they devoted themselves to this gathering, to this corporate gathering. And I love that it says to the apostles' teaching. Notice where the apostles' apostrophe is. It's afterwards. That means there's multiple people teaching here. That means that they're learning from the collective wisdom of their group. And I think there's something really powerful about that. Not just going to one person for all the wisdom you could ever need. Not just going to in a church world, not just going to one pastor or one specific human, but to go to the collective wisdom of other people. When Marie and I were first even considering having kids, which I think Marie was considering way before I was, but when we were first starting to think about even having kids, I remember there was a moment where we were like, what do we do with them though? Like, because then we get them, and then we have to I guess parent or something. And so we should probably figure that out before we even really have one. And so we went to some people who we really trusted, and we were like, hey, you have kids we like. How did you do that? And we asked them, how did you make kids that we like and that are good kids and that like you and you have a good relationship? And we sat down with people and we started learning from them because there was a collective wisdom of people that we trusted, and we asked them those kind of questions. And I think there's always a wisdom we can learn from other people. But then we realized that it shouldn't just be us taking in the information. It would be wiser of us to let those people just be around our kids, right? Let's not just be the filtration of information and then take it from us to our kids. Let them come be around our kids. That's collective wisdom. And now they're pouring into our kids. Now they're making our kids better because their presence is with them. It's that whole it takes a village to raise a child idea. And I think there's something really powerful about saying it's the apostles teaching to multiple voices speaking into this, not just one. And in what you'll see down the road, we had a small group leader training for the first time this last week, and Janessa just knocked it out of the park. It was so good. And we brought in some people who are interested in leading small groups for restoration. We'll call them community groups. And this whole thing of having multiple voices that will be teaching community groups, I think is so powerful. It shouldn't be classes where I'm standing up teaching or only people who are staff members or whatever. There's a lot of apostles who could teach and a lot of people who have collective wisdom. And I think it'd be foolish of us not to use that. And I think that's one of the powerful things about what we're going to be doing through our community groups. Then it says, and to fellowship. Now, fellowship, of course, guys, this is the most churchy word maybe of all the words. Nobody else uses the word fellowship. Nobody's like, hey, you want to go out and fellowship on Friday night? What are you doing? Oh man, we were fellowshipping so hard. Nobody ever says this. Yeah, man, we're just watching that movie. I just felt the fellowship, in the room. Nobody says this word. It's a very churchy word, right? And we've lost the meaning of the word because it's almost vanilla. It just doesn't matter anymore. It's nebulous now. Because we use it so much and it doesn't make sense. And we have halls where you fellowship. We have fellowship halls. Who else has a fellowship hall? We go to this hall to fellowship. It doesn't make sense. We've lost the meaning of the word. But the word actually is a word called koinonia. And koinonia is this word that's fantastic. It actually means that everybody has joint participation. Now, in koinonia, there is nobody above anybody else. There's no other levels or layers. Everybody has a common shared experience. Everybody's pulling on the same rope at the same speed, doing the same work. Does that make sense? Nobody's doing more work. Nobody's doing less work. Everybody's together in koinonia. That's what fellowship really means. You're sharing experiences together. You're doing life together. So they've done this fellowship, and then the breaking of bread, so they're carb loading, and then they're praying together, right? And the breaking of bread may mean that they're taking literally what we would call communion. That may mean that, but we really don't know. So doing these things together, and again, I think in our context, this is where you'll see this lived out, is in what we'll call community groups when we really get closer to launch date. We want everybody in community groups. Now, right now, we kind of are a small group. And so we feel like this is a good place to start, is committing to this, because this community needs you too, in this room. This is why Sunday mornings are important, is because the collective wisdom, the collective group, the gathering that happens is so important for multiple voices, multiple people being in the same room at the same time. Not just to hear apostles teaching, but to hear and experience that koinonia of fellowship, of being together, having a shared experience. And then we do have, some food and we pray. But that's why this is so important. And we want to see those things happen. Now, it goes from there, and it goes into another section of this self-sacrifice that's kind of interesting. And this one is the one that everybody gets touchy about, and this is a little, I don't really personally have an issue with this anymore. There was a day where this terrified me to talk about this, but I'm just going to say this is a real thing. And it says, everyone was filled with awe and many wonders at the signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Now, we're not saying you need to sell everything you have, because that's what everybody focuses on in this passage, right? It's like, oh, great, now I got to sell everything and give it away to the church. That's what they're going to say. No, please don't do that. That would probably not be the best decision. Now, when we did the garage sale a few weeks back, that was similar, I guess. We took your collective junk, and sold it, made money for the church. But this is a little different, and it's not. This isn't a communism or a socialism of sell everything and everybody gets the same amount of everything. The Bible really never ever talks about something like that. That's not what's being said here. What they're saying is there is self-sacrifice of saying we see a need in our community and we will do what it takes to meet that need because that's a part of our community. That's one of our own, and we're not going to let them go without. Does that make sense? It's very different. This isn't a government issued thing. This is a community-based thing where you see need within your community and you fill the need. Financially is obviously what they're talking about in some ways here, but there's other things that go into this. It's not just treasure. It's not just money. It's also your time. It's where you give your time if you see a need and you can fill it with your time, or if you can do it with your talent. If you have a talent that you're withholding, just like I talked about with Austin a second ago, if you have a talent that you're withholding, give it to the community. Make the community better. Fill the need. Does that make sense? Self-sacrificing. And then it goes into this last piece that I think is fantastic. I think this is really important. Every day, they continued to meet together in the temple courts. And then they broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Now this is different. Okay, so they go to the temple courts, but they've got like 3,000 people. So they're not going to be able to meet in, it doesn't mean they went to one home or in their homes. They went to individual homes. They had small groups. That's what was going on. I don't think one of their homes could fit 3,000 people. So they were going to individual homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts. They were praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. That last line is fantastic. Notice what Luke, when he writes this book, what he says. First of all, he gives credit where credit is due. The Lord added to their number. It wasn't them. It wasn't fancy preaching. It wasn't worship. It wasn't what their talents brought to the table. The Lord added to their number. They were praying for this harvest. They were praying for people to come to know him, and people were coming because the Lord was ordaining it. That's the only way this happens, guys. The Lord added to their number those who were being saved. Now, if they're adding to their number, that means that their community was not closed off. See, sometimes we have this idea that once we get in community, that it's a closed situation, that it's us four and no more. Like it's just us, right? That's what it feels like. Like that's what community is. It's inward focused. This community was so radically outwardly focused. They were still worried about empty seats in their community, saying we could fill that one, we could fill that one. They weren't inwardly focused. They were still adding to their number daily. And sometimes we get this idea that once we get together, we start to become self-serving and we start to go, this is our little community, so please don't bother it. Please leave it alone. And this is our little community, where instead it's a self-sacrificing community saying, no, who else could we bring into this community? Who else could we add to this? Because people are dying to be in community. People are always looking to be in community. It is so attractive when you have a healthy, thriving community. People want to be a part of it, don't they? And for us to turn away from that, it's horrible to leave people out of that. This community was radically inclusive. And I think I was talking to a guy this week. There's a guy, he's a small groups guy at a very large church up in Chicago. And we were kind of picking his brain. Janessa and I called him and we were talking to him about, what do you guys do with small groups and how do you do this and this and this? And he kept telling us small group stories about how their small group was adding people to their group from the community around them. Like they'd be like, hey, pray for my neighbor. I'm going to go invite him to come to our small group. And they were always adding people. Then they'd get to a size where their small group would get too big and then they'd multiply it. They'd go, well, we have another leader. You go lead that group, we'll lead this group. And those groups would multiply and multiply and multiply. That's what he kept telling me about. I was like, well, what about like we all, are inwardly focused on what we're doing together? Well, yeah, we are. We love each other. We care for each other. But that doesn't mean that our community is exclusive. And he said this line, which was amazing to me. He said, I think in the church, the only thing that can slack off and nobody cares is evangelism. He said, if your worship starts to slack off in the church, everybody gets up in arms. Like, what's going on? This isn't very good. I don't like this anymore. Your preaching slacks off, people get up in arms. Oh, man, the preaching's not very good. It's not working. Children's ministry, student ministry, even small groups. These kind of things are the things where you're like, man, people are up in arms about it really fast, right? But when evangelism slacks off, almost nobody's like, I'm really upset that we're not doing more evangelism. I have never, ever heard a church person tell me that. It's the one thing that can slack off and nobody cares. This community was absolutely out there adding to the numbers. They were letting the Lord add to their numbers on a daily basis, and they were making room for it. They're going, oh, we got another empty chair. We got another empty chair. We got another empty chair. Come join our community. We'd rather have you here than anywhere else. And I really, literally believe people are dying to be a part of this. There were some studies done last March. Both Huffington Post and Time Magazine posted articles about this. And there was actually this study that was done that found that maybe the next biggest epidemic in health was isolation, was not having enough close relationships. That may be the next biggest epidemic in health. In fact, they were saying that 1 in 5 people, 1 in every 5 people, 20% of people said that they had no close relationships in their life. None. No close relationships. That includes family. That includes other people. 1 in 5 would say, I have no close relationships in my life. And they found that this epidemic was so powerful and so bad, it would increase your mortality rate by 30%. The mortality rate increased by 30% with people that did not have close relationships. That is on par with smoking. That is on par with substance abuse. That's even on par with heart disease. That's how high this is, 30%. Isolation, lack of connection to other people, I believe it's not just a physical trait. I believe it's because it's been spiritually wired into us. We have to be a part of community. It's just the way we're wired. And when we isolate ourselves, when we're not doing that anymore, we need it so badly, don't we? And it's actually detrimental to our health that we're not doing that. It's amazing to me, isn't it? Like you think about, but now we've got Facebook and we got Twitter and we got Instagram, we got email, we got Skype, we got FaceTime. There's so many ways to get a hold of people, right? And it's amazing how many ways there are to still be isolated and still feel isolated. People feel isolated. When they see community, they need community. And that's maybe the only thing the church has to offer these days that's attractive. There may not be much else that the church really has to offer, but we can offer community. That's one thing we can offer very well. We can invite people into places like this, and we can offer them a chance to be in community. And in fact, at Restoration, that may be the only thing we have to offer right now. Like, we don't have anything else. We got relationships. That's about all we got, right? That's about all we have to offer. And I think we have to be intentional about our community. We have to be willing to devote ourselves to it. We have to be willing to say we'll be self-sacrificing to make this thing happen, not self-serving about it. And I think if we were to look at ourselves and see where we could invest in that and where we could do these things, maybe the next step for you is to invite somebody into this who you see that you're like, they need community so badly. It doesn't matter if they're close to Jesus or not. They just need community. This might be the right place for them. Maybe that's your next step, is to invite somebody into community, into this community, if nothing else. Or maybe your next step is to take a next step in this community and say, hey, we're in for this one, to devote yourself to this community, to make it a discipline to be a part of this community. Not just a when it's convenient thing, but make it a discipline to be a part of this community as we continue to get closer and closer to adding more and more and more to this community. And so there's some ways you can do that, and Janessa will talk about that a little bit more in a second, but we would invite you to partner with us, to actually partner with us, and to be a part of this community if you're not already, where you would be investing your time and devoting yourself to it. You would be investing financially, just like it said in there, just to meet the needs of the community, and inviting your friends, because it's a radically inclusive community. And so so we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. There's some ways you can get involved with that. Maybe that's what God's calling you to, or maybe he's calling you right now to invite somebody else into this community, because maybe there's somebody else that needs it so badly. Because again, I believe we're wired for it. I believe the world is yearning for it. I believe we need it because it's the way that God designed us. Let's pray together. God, I thank you so much for this time. I thank you so much for this community that you're building. I thank you for the people that you're already orchestrating to be a part of this. I thank you for the chance that we have to be a part of an inclusive community. And God, I pray that we would be radically inclusive, that we'd be able to open our doors to anyone and invite them into this community. God, I pray that as we get closer to launching community groups into homes, God, that you would be in that and putting the right people in place to lead those groups, that would be able to handle that. And God, I thank you for the collective wisdom of this group that's here today, for this group that's making restoration a reality. And God, I pray that we would get together, that we would be a part of this, because we believe that restoration happens in community. And so God, would you please use us to either take a next step in this community right now, or take a next step by inviting somebody else into community that needs it. Use us this week. Open our eyes to those things. Open our eyes to those people. Praise things your name.